Math 1332, Chapter 3, Symbolic Logic, Section 1, Statements and Quantifiers, Video 3, Quantified Statements. We'll uncover all the hidden stuff in a second, but when you hear the word quantify, what do you think? What do you think that word means? Or the related word quantity? Maybe that one's easier. A quantity is an amount of something. So when we talk about a quantified statement, it makes sense to think that we're talking about a statement that refers to an amount of something. In this case, it's an amount referring to the subject of the statement. So without further ado, a quantified statement is a statement that quantifies its subject. In other words, states a certain quantity in the subject. These words stating quantity are called quantifiers. So there's a word that we need to know the definition of, or at least be able to identify them. Now, I want to clarify that when I say states a certain quantity in the subject, I don't necessarily mean like 3 dogs or 7 wives or something like that. You'll see here in just a second. All right, so let's identify the quantifier in each statement, starting with statement A. All dogs go to heaven. Which word or words in there is the quantifier? The word that quantifies the subject. Well, first off, what is the subject? Dogs. And hence the quantifier is all. Oops, don't want to do that. Let's try this again. The quantifier is all. It quantifies the number of dogs, all of them. Now, I'm not saying this is a true or false statement. And of course, it's contingent on your religious beliefs, so we're not even going to go down that path. Oh, by the way, the concepts of symbolic logic and religion are not mutually exclusive. All right, B. Each person in the room gets a prize. Which word is the quantifier? Well, what's the subject? Person. Person gets. And which word quantifies the number of people? Each. Let's go to the third statement. Every good boy deserves fudge. A mnemonic used to remember the notes for the spaces on a staff when you're in treble clef. Every good boy deserves fudge. The subject is boy. The verb is deserves, but what's the quantifier? The quantifier is the word every. That states the quantity of boys that deserve fudge. Every one of them, or at least every good boy, the quantity of good boys that deserve fudge. Fourth one, no good deed goes unpunished. I know, a very pessimistic view on life. What is the quantifier? How many deeds go unpunished? No good deed goes unpunished. So the word no there is a quantifier. And it's kind of the opposite of the first three, because the first three are kind of conveying the idea that every or all, or every single person or a thing in a group of subjects, whereas D is the opposite, none of you. What about E, which is none of today's contestants advanced to the next round? Quantifier, how many contestants? None. The quantifier in this statement is the word none. All, each, every, no, and none are the quantifiers in these statements. Now, these are not the only types of quantifiers, but I did want to lump all 5 of these together for a reason. The first 3 convey the idea of universality. Everyone in this group has a characteristic. All dogs go to heaven. Each person in the room gets a prize. Every good boy deserves fudge. Whereas the other 2 are the complete opposite. So you could almost call them anti-universal, where none of them have a characteristic. No good deed goes unpunished. None of today's contestants advance to the next round. But in a weird sort of way, all 5 of them are speaking on a universal level. The first 3 say universally everything is something, and the last 2 say universally everything is not something. And as a consequence, the quantifiers in the previous 5 examples are called universal quantifiers. So there's a word that we're defining. So we'll put it in orange. I don't know why I'm defining things in orange. But universal quantifiers are quantifiers that refer to all of a subject, but it can also be the complete opposite, meaning none of them. Because, hope I remembered what was under here. These quantifiers state that all of a group have a characteristic. Even the negative quantifiers are universal, no and none, because they state that all of a group lack a characteristic. So as long as you're referring to everybody in either a positive or a negative context, those are called universal quantifiers. And the only thing under here is that list. Here are 5 universal quantifiers. But again, what makes them universal is that they refer to all of a group of subjects, either in a positive sense or a negative sense. So what are the type of quantifiers are there? Well, let's take a look. Identify the quantifier in each statement. Some athletes take steroids. We're not saying if this is true or false, although we know some athletes have taken steroids, so we can argue that the statement is true. If it said all, I would argue it's false, but that's an argument for another day. Some athletes take steroids. What is the quantifier? What is the word quantifying the subject? The subject is athletes, and the quantifier is the word some. Some of these athletes. How many athletes? Some. How many is that? Some. G. There exists a real number x such that x squared equals -1. Don't panic. We're just looking for a quantifier. What do you think the quantifier is? This one's a little trickier because it's actually 2 words. The 2 words that quantify the subject are there exist. Excuse me. Now this one's a little trickier. And really, I shouldn't say it quantifies the subject, because the subject of this sentence from a grammatical perspective is the word there. Exist. A real number exists. No, I take that back. I scratch what I just said. The subject is a real number, x. A real number x exists such that. There exists a real number x such that. The quantifier is there exists. So what's the quantifier on this last one? At least one of my pets is a hedgehog. What do you think the quantifier is? Just checking something real quick to be consistent. The quantifier, which states a quantity, is at least 1. How many athletes take steroids? Some of them. There exists a real number. How many of my pets are a hedgehog? At least 1. So those are our quantifiers. But unlike the first 5 quantifiers, these are not speaking on a universal level. The first statement, or statement F, does not say all athletes take steroids, only some of them. Statement G doesn't say all real numbers x satisfy x squared equals -1, but there exists one that does. There exists a real number that does. And H doesn't say all of my pets are hedgehogs, but at least one of them is, which, by the way, that's true. And if you don't believe me, this is Bojangles. He's our hedgehog. I think he can hang around for the rest of the video. Right, Bojangles? Yeah. He's like I was sleeping because I'm nocturnal. But anyway, the quantifiers in the previous 3 examples are called, well, they're not universal because they're not talking about a universality. They're talking about the existence of an object that has a characteristic. Some athletes take steroids. There exists a real number x such that x squared equals -1. At least one of my pets is a hedgehog. There exists one of my pets that's a hedgehog, which is why these are called existential quantifiers. Bo's getting a little rambunctious here. It's okay, buddy. It's okay, the video is almost over. But the quantifiers in the previous 3 examples are called existential quantifiers. And oops, that didn't turn out the way I wanted. Let's try this again. Let's try this again. Oh, Bo, relax. Existential quantifiers. And they're called existential quantifiers because they state the existence of an object that is a characteristic, as opposed to saying that all such objects have that characteristic. And underneath here is just the list of existential quantifiers that we saw. Some there exist in at least one. Now, there could easily be more quantifiers than the ones listed, but these are going to be the most common ones that we see. And if any others come up, I'll be sure to point them out. All right, Bo, you ready to go back to your pen? Say, yes, I am. I want to go back to sleep.